Welcome to the Shield Your Business from Chaos podcast, where there's no building, no people, no third-party suppliers, and no systems all combined to create Chaos the Dragon, which is battled by King Phoenix and his shield.
Hi, welcome to the KISSBCP podcast. I'm your host, Roswitha and today is part 2 of Cautionary Tales in Business Continuity, What to Do When Your Situation Sours. Our guest today is Paul Striedl. In our last episode, we talked about a couple of situations where a change in the business brought about changes to Paul both professionally as well as changes to the business continuity program and a negative impact ultimately, I believe, to the company. Now, before we get started for the second half of the topic, I want to just go ahead and to our viewers and listeners, like and subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen or watch. It's the KISSBCP podcast by Kingsbridge. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you find this interesting. All right, Paul, let's resume our conversation. Last time we talked about 2 different situations in your past where you were professionally impacted and made a choice to change jobs, and because of decisions that the company made. The first situation was a de-emphasis on the business continuity program, and the second situation was as the result of a merger. So let's go ahead and start on the next cautionary tale.
Okay. So, thank you. So thank you again for doing this. And let's see. So the third situation to bring up was with a financial services company.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about a business that's heavily regulated, that, is mandated to do business continuity. And I was brought into a situation to really resuscitate a program that was in a very distressed state. There was no policy. They really didn't do exercises. There was no risk assessments. Again, it was shocking to what I took over. And, about 6 months into my tenure there, my boss retired due to a medical reason. So they basically eliminated her spot, and I reported to my boss's boss. So that's always kind of, interesting to begin with, that the person who you really didn't interact with, the person who's not part of the interviewing process, is now your boss. However, my concerns with that situation were alleviated pretty quickly because we developed a really good rapport.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't friends. I always believe, at least with your supervisor or with direct reports that you have, you maintain what I like to call a professional distance.
Yeah.
You want a good relationship, but you're not going to go out for drinks after work. That might bring it to a level where at some point when the difficult decisions have to be made, you don't want to, again, you don't want to be in those situations. So went through a bunch of different real events, always, recovered really well. I was able for the first time in my career to actually hire staff, which again was always one of my goals.
Mm-hmm.
I was ultimately able to bring 2 people on. I had performance reviews that I walked on water, and that everything was going pretty well. Then, for what would have been my last performance appraisal with this individual, I was informed I was doing a rather poor job. And I first was taken aback. I'm like, is she joking? Because this is the first time anything like this had ever come up in any conversation that we ever had, even our one-on-ones. It just didn't make any sense to me. Our internal audit group just finished their review of business continuity, and I had a report with no findings. So the fact is, if I was performing so poorly, how come internal audit is finding nothing to call out in their report? Yeah. Other companies that have come in, because again, this was financial services that touched mortgages and investment banking. So a whole litany of different regulators would come in to review us. And even those companies would say, these are some of the best plans we ever saw.
Mm-hmm.
So, the only thing I was told when I asked where was this coming from was that this individual did not like the way I ran the business continuity steering committee meetings. And I'm like, wow. So I went from far exceeds expectations, not even getting a written performance appraisal. So not everybody at this company got one. So that wasn't
Mm-hmm.
atypical for the company. So again, I was just completely flummoxed. And then, I was asked to do some very arbitrary work that really had no value. It was more busy work. And, it was just a disagreement as to the vision of the program. And again, this was
Mm-hmm.
about the fourth year into the program, where, again, I think the fourth year is probably the hardest because you've gotten all the heavy lifting done, you've got most of your plans done, you've
Yeah.
done a series of exercises, and that fourth year, the same deliverables aren't as maybe interesting.
Yeah.
They're, again, they're not as sexy.
That's a
So,
good way to describe it.
right. So, I think what I learned from that was that, you know what, I've got to do a better job of documenting my own performance. So as part of like one-on-ones, and again, this was, you know, I left the company maybe 3 months after that. But I know in jobs since then, what I would do is I know when I had my one-on-one time, I would always put something in writing. I put
Mm-hmm.
these are my accomplishments for the week. This is what I'm going to work on the next week. And that dialogue and constantly ask how I was doing. I kind of took that for granted because we had such a good rapport.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know what I could have done maybe differently at the time, except for maybe document my own performance better.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And, again, I was shocked. And then, I would talk to some of my peers in the group. I'm like, are you hearing something? Am I not doing something right? What am I doing wrong? And the consensus was, you know what? Within the group, business continuity is the least of the concerns because it's such a program running at such a good caliber
Right.
that nobody could really give me advice on what I should be doing differently. So I could only take it that a situation happened or my boss was given bad advice. So that forced again another job search, and within 90 days I was able to able to go somewhere else. And we had some what I like to think are minor disagreements about metrics and things, but never anything that would have reached that kind of level where, I know from someone who's done, performance reviews for people, you don't surprise them on that day. If you've detected something that should be corrected, you identify it at the
Right.
time
Mm-hmm.
with the intent that you'd want that person to fix it before the performance review comes up, because you don't want to impact negatively that person's merit.
Right.
Now granted, if that person doesn't work on it, you should include it in the report
Mm-hmm.
because that's the way things are done, a lot of times from a legal perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's surprising is how quickly what you think a good rapport is could turn sour for reasons that you just can't explain.
That's
So, right. So what I've learned, because again, to me, if there's no value in just saying woe is me and then moving on, but learning to better document, constantly ask for feedback, how you're doing. Is there anything you should be doing differently? Is there anything you want me to work on? Having that conversation more frequently with future supervisors to hopefully not get to that point
mm-hmm.
in the future. Now, I could see if our audits were bad, if regulators came in, they said, we don't like these plans, we don't like the program.
Mm-hmm.
I could see if, again, we had crisis events that we didn't respond well to. I would get that. But when you get no negative feedback to all of a sudden your situation changed completely, the things you learn in hindsight that, again, it's like that fourth year curse a lot of times of your program in a way where, again, that steady state is sometimes harder to describe than the beginnings of a program.
I mean, it's a really unfortunate experience, truly. And I think that happens more frequently than what we'd like to think about. And the advice to document your one-on-ones, what have I done, what should I be working on, constantly asking for feedback, I think is crucial as a bit of a safety net for any employee. It's really valuable advice. These are the things that you should do to further your career. These are the things to do to prepare you for a merit review. All of that information is really helpful to have, to be tracking those things, because you can't walk into a merit review without saying, hey, this is why I deserve this raise I just asked for. But it is a cautionary tale for sure. And sometimes there's no reason that you can sort of suss out, as in your situation. You've got theories about why this happened, but nothing that you can sort of concretely point to say, well, I wore a green shirt for the meeting instead of a blue shirt. And good people and good bosses and good employees can agree to disagree about certain things, but you were not forewarned in any way. You were not told prior to this incident, oh, I really didn't like what you did in that steering committee meeting today. Could you do this instead next time? You didn't get that kind of feedback throughout the prior term, right? So it almost sounds like somebody needed a reason for whatever the situation was, and oh well, this is the reason that I can come up with.
Right. And then as the end, or kind of the coda to the situation, when I handed in my resignation, this individual was surprised. So if I take this person at this word, they had no idea what that situation did to affect me, to prompt me to leave. So, again, I would hope that with one of my employees, I would never act in that way. And that just would reinforce that, again, if there is a performance issue, you address it with the employee at the time, with giving that person the opportunity to improve before that formal process.
Absolutely.
That has to happen.
That is the only right thing to do. To do otherwise does a disservice to the supervisor-employee relationship. Number one, if somebody would stay, and number two, it's just a flat out disservice to the employee. It's not a fair way to treat them at all. I want to keep coming back to, what does this do to the business continuity program? You've obviously landed on your feet, and I'll have more to say about that towards the end. Because actually, kudos to you for not putting up with stuff that you shouldn't as an employee. But in terms of the impact to your business continuity program, or the company's business continuity program, how short-sighted to lose a valuable employee. Turnover is expensive. Everybody at this point knows that. It costs far more to hire and train a new employee than it does to keep an existing one. And short of serious performance issues, there's no good reason to sort of induce somebody to leave when it's much more cost effective to keep them. And if there is a small problem, fix the small problem and move on from it, which clearly this particular boss did not want to do. I'm sort of flabbergasted that they were shocked that you turned in your resignation.
Right.
Exactly what I would have done.
Right. And then it could have ended in such a better way. We could have had a conversation 6 months before that, where this person said, look, I want you to do these things. These are the expectations. I want you to do this my way. And again, as the employee, as long as they're asking for something reasonable within the job description, you have to do those things. That's a matter of just being employed.
Yeah.
And, you look back at times and you can almost laugh, but again, these situations, they from time to time, when you do think about them, you always think about, what could I have done better not to get to that point?
Right. Let's go ahead and move on to our fourth and last souring situation and talk about that, please, Paul.
Okay, so this was a startup California fintech company, And this was, probably the smallest company I ever worked for. They had about 450 employees. However, since they're in that fintech space, you know, regulators, customers asking business continuity
Mhm.
questions prompted me to be hired.
Yeah.
And it was great. I got to build a program from scratch. I knew the fintech area quite well because banking, you can only do
Mhm.
banking so many certain ways.
Yeah.
So I was able to get in there really quickly, do BIAs, do business continuity plans, work with
Mhm.
vendors to do testing. And then about 6 months into my tenure there, they changed CEOs. So the CEO who actually started the company was forced out, and they another individual who was in the C level took that person's place. And then they decided to completely rechange their business model. So they went from being a fintech company offering credit cards and checking accounts and savings accounts to getting into de-emphasizing that part of the business and getting into the carbon credit business. So
Okay.
a complete 180 and change of business process. So you look at it and you're like, okay, well, if they're de-emphasizing the thing that I know really well, I'm going to start learning this carbon credit side of the business so
Mhm.
I could be as an effective employee as possible. And when you start digging into how that whole business works, there's really no there. From a business continuity standpoint, there's not really a lot you could do.
Mhm.
So, um, 2 months after that, they did their first RIF, reduction in force, is what they call it. And the thing that was most telling was that I was part of a team that also included sourcing and third party vendor risk management. So they let two of my boss's people go, and they never even included my boss in the decision making of that process. So my boss was completely, again, surprised by what
Wow.
happened. So I'm like, okay, so if this is how this company operates, are they going to do a second one of these riffs if the first one doesn't, improve the
Isn't
company's
enough. Yeah.
financial position? So then, fast forward another 3 or 4 months later, I learned that they're going to do a second one of these riffs. So they went from about 450 employees down to like 325.
Mm.
And you're talking about de-emphasizing the part of the regulated part of the business to going to an unregulated part of the business. I'm like, you know what? I don't see how this company can maintain having a business continuity person. So I was the
Yeah.
only part of the team. So I'm like, I got to start the job search again because I just don't think I'm going to be, the company can't afford to keep me
Right.
essentially. So I was proactive. I started my process of looking for another position. And luckily, I was able to make contact with the company that eventually did hire me even before the second riff, which I was included. Because as soon as I heard that it was going to happen, I'm like, well, you know what? My boss is not going to give me any forewarning, assuming they're going to follow the same kind of protocol.
Mhm.
So I was proactive and I was able to get something rather quickly. So that's why, again, lessons learned when you're working, a lot of small companies don't even hire business continuity
Very
people.
true. Very true.
They just, it's a luxury for a lot of them. But the fact is that they did hire me. And then I love the work. I love the people who I work with. I was hoping to be there for a long time. It was a remote job. I didn't have to, deal with commutes or any of
Mhm.
that process. But, if they're hemorrhaging money, at some point, business continuity is going to be something, it's, do we keep a customer service person or do we keep the business continuity person? That's a no brainer,
Yeah.
especially when you're
Unfortunately, but
losing
true.
money. Yeah. So, cautionary tale, small companies, they don't have as many resources, uh, and especially when you look at a company completely rechanging their business model, getting into a part of the business that is not regulated. It's not like they decided all of a sudden they're going to do mortgages or they're going to do
Right.
something else within the financial sphere, something completely, off the radar that's not regulated, doesn't require business continuity that I'm glad I started my job search early and I was able to, again, land something quickly so that it didn't, you know, from a personal standpoint,
Yeah.
impact me financially at all.
Yeah. Good. the small company issue or the startup issue is of course there's always a risk there. What's unfortunate about small companies is that sometimes they really need a small business continuity plan,
Mhm.
different scale than you know banking or oil and gas or something, but they don't necessarily have the resources to financially support even sort of half a body in that role.
Mhm.
And it's sad because they're the ones that can often be at risk from not recovering from an incident. So
Mhm.
that's kind of an unfortunate consequence that, yeah, if you have to choose between a customer service role and a business continuity role, kind of a no-brainer, like you said. What I find so remarkable and very sort of encouraging, and I hope it encourages the audience as well, is that you were proactive in your job searches. You knew your worth in the market, and you made pretty quick, decisive decisions to not put up with an unacceptable situation and to go on a job hunt. And in each of these cases, you landed on your feet quickly, whether it was a good market or a not so good market from the sound of it, and made choices that advanced your career, gave you the opportunity, which in your case, what you really wanted to do is you love building business continuity programs from scratch or fixing
Mhm.
really broken ones. And you took each of those lemons and definitely made lemonade out of them. What I would love to tell everyone is do not stay with a company where you are not valued unless it's just an absolute financial necessity and there's just no other option. But please keep looking. Always keep your
Mhm.
resume up to date. I mean, that's advice that I hope everybody by now follows. But it's easy to forget, especially if you've been with a company for a while. You think you don't need it,
Mhm.
but you never know when a riff or a layoff is coming. And situations change, new management comes in, mergers, startups. There's all these different reasons that Paul has walked us through, each of them his own personal experience. And you owe it to yourself and your personal situation to
Mhm.
look out for yourself, and being proactive about that job hunt is truly the best thing that you could have done in each of those situations. And I'm very glad to hear that you didn't stay in a situation that was so very unsatisfactory any of those times. um, I've had different reasons for leaving the positions that I've left. One or two of them were for negative reasons, that situations that
Mhm.
happened at the company. um, and I'm really grateful that I was able to step out and make a decisive decision that I needed to search for something, and always
Mhm.
gratefully landed on my feet. And it was always something that furthered my career in one way or another. I'm grateful that it was never something that was like a step back. I know everybody's situation is
Mhm.
different. We all have different comfort levels about change and risk, but there is nothing constant. And we don't live in a world where most people stay at a company for 3 or 4 decades. So it's always wise to know your worth. And the compensation benchmark study that Cheyenne Marling does is just truly of great value to our industry.
Mhm.
So,
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. And the last couple years have been really good to the business continuity profession. There are a ton of jobs. And I've been
mhm,
fortunate, at least in my last couple job searches, where I was fortunate to have significant interest.
mhm.
So the jobs are out there. Companies are looking for people like us, seek them out.
Very, very true. And a cautionary tale to anybody in senior management listening or watching about this is please don't devalue your business continuity management program or the staff that supports it. Um, Truly, just watching the news, it's so obvious that there is a great need for improved business continuity programs across the board, not scaled down ones or eliminated ones. And letting people handle their own plans, I think is
Mhm.
awesome.
Right. Again, without that driving force to keep those plans updated, because as good as your program is, you might have some groups that they'll know, you know what, I got to update my plan. You know, we changed managers, we added
absolutely.
equipment, we have a new application. And a couple of them will actually be proactive and let you know, but that
Hmm.
is definitely the minority. You know, if you're not there reminding them, you know what, the year is up, we need you to
Hmm.
update this, we need to do another exercise. You know, if nobody's doing that, very little of that work is going to happen organically.
Yeah. And it's of very little value once it's out of date, especially in a company
Mm.
where you've got higher turnover, that if you don't keep those plans evergreen, continuously updated, when you've got new staff coming in, they're really not going to know
Mhm.
where to turn for guidance during an event. And making decisions on the fly is the antithesis of having a good business continuity management program where you've got things planned out enough that people know what to do and people don't freak out. And ultimately, the goal is you want a
Mhm.
successful recovery, you want the business continuity, the resilience, to not have a disruption if you're able to prevent it. So thank you, Paul. I really appreciate the conversation today. We hope you found value in this. And we look forward to seeing you every 2 weeks. Look for us wherever you listen and watch podcasts. KISS BC Podcast by Kingsbridge. My name is Roswitha Firth, and thank you, Paul Striedl, today for being our guest. We really appreciate your time, and let us know what you think. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having me. Okay.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you again.
Okay. Bye.